Lauren Tucker, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you. You're joining us from Chicago. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. And today we're going to be talking about inclusion, optimizing talent, and female leadership in the workplace. All very important topics. I think they overlap and go together well. So this will be a fun conversation. As we get started, I wanted to share Lauren Tucker's bio with everybody. Dr. Lauren Tucker is founder and CEO of Do What Matters, an inclusion management consultancy which challenges the advertising industry's cultural homogeneity through inclusion management solutions designed to foster greater creativity and innovation and drive growth. Using insights from behavioral analysis, they do what matters and uses their deep knowledge of agency and market operations to integrate inclusion management solutions into the daily performance of their organizations. Again, a pleasure to have you. Anything else you would like to share with listeners by way of your background or personal context before we dive on in?
Yes, actually I do because we have moved beyond just the advertising industry, although that's still one of our most important verticals, but we have also what we call moved beyond DEI. We call it moving beyond DEI, how to manage humans for the 21st century. What we have learned over the last 2 years in this very fast evolving situation, really, or culture, is that inclusion management, and that's not just about making people feel safe, valued, heard, and productive, but it's also about getting the right people into the right jobs, doing the right jobs, elevating their relevant differences so that they can create, innovate product, services, and content that are relevant and meaningful and memorable and remarkable to an increasingly multicultural, transcultural, and global world. And so we see inclusion management, especially in an era of talent scarcity. We see inclusion management as the critical talent management strategy for managing humans in the 21st century. And we really need to understand that, because right now we have basically 0.5 people for every job that is available in the United States. More importantly, though, talent scarcity is a mindset that we really challenge our clients to have, because when you are dealing with innovation, creativity, knowledge and information and service, these are uniquely human capabilities that cannot be relegated to the commoditization that we saw in the 20th century, which I like to call the century of talent abuse. And for those of us who came of professional age in the 20th century, we were all raised by wolves. I mean, really, we were all raised by wolves. And we have not learned the skills, the capabilities to really manage humans and deliver our management mandates with humanity. And and I will tell you, young millennials and Generation Z, the big quit's going on. It's not stopping, because they have other alternatives and they're employing those other alternatives, and their values have changed. So we feel we're uniquely positioned to help company leadership, people leaders, to go beyond DEI, to really focus on process changes that need to happen if you are going to manage humans and manage your human capital, those assets that are really going to drive growth in the 21st century. And you ignore these changes at your peril if you do not really pursue this pivot in understanding how to manage human capital.
Yeah, I fully agree with everything you just said, and it's fascinating to me as I talk to a lot of people in a lot of different industries, a lot of different kind of leadership levels and positions, and I hear people sharing your perspective, but I also hear many people basically complaining about these young, entitled millennial and Gen Z workers who just need to like suck it up, and like everyone else had to like pay their dues and they should too, and blah 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 blah. And I think, well, okay, I mean, you have every right to feel that way. If you're an old white dude and you feel like these younger millennial or Gen Z workers should just do what you did, you have the right to believe that. But guess what? If you create that kind of an environment, that situation, are they going to come work for you? That's the question. And the answer is a resounding no. They're going to vote with their feet. They're going to go somewhere else. They have options. Their priorities are different. Their values are different. They don't, in many cases, not, I don't want to paint with too broad of brushstrokes here. It certainly, this comment doesn't apply to everyone who's a millennial or Gen Z, but increasingly you see millennial and Gen Zs that are just opting out of traditional societal norms around what it means to now be a young adult, to be starting their career, things like the suburban lifestyle and buying a home and like those types of things. They're just saying, no, I don't care about that. I don't want that. I want more independence. I want more flexibility. I want to do things that matter. I want to make a difference. And so many are adopting gig work opportunities or utilizing various platforms for contingent work and contract work and those sorts of things. There's all sorts of ways that younger workers are entering the workforce, and increasingly it's not in the traditional ways, and it's because the traditional ways don't work for them and don't mesh with their values and their priorities. We can bemoan that all we want, but that's the reality, and we can either figure out how to shift so we can attract and retain good talent from that demographic, or we're going to suffer and pay the consequences. We're just going to be completely irrelevant as employers, and no one's going to want to come work for us.
Absolutely. I think, it's interesting, and we don't tend to talk about this because it seems like a 20th century concept, but I would argue that it's a recurring concept in all centuries. And that is what we are really experiencing is a huge generation gap. And we need to address that. And the boomers who grew up in the greed is good in 1980s and 90s, where accumulation of things was everything, and kind of bastardizing even the values of their parents, which were, I want to make sure my kids have a better life than I do, right? That was, my father was in World War II, and it was really about, I want to make sure my kids have a better life than I did. This is an opportunity to do that. I'm going to work hard to take care of my family. I think in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, it became about, I want to, whoever has the most toys wins, and whoever's kids has the most toys wins. And it became a soullessness that I think by the time we got to 2008, many of those kids saw their parents' house of cards fold, right? That just fell down. And that is probably pivotal as it was for my dad living through the Depression. And I think it structured expectations of life, of values, what work really meant, that loyalty. We knew way before 2008, right? The mergers and acquisitions that happened in the late 90s, early 2000s left a lot of people out of jobs, no loyalty. And so these kids grew up with an idea that, okay, work should probably not play as big of a role, not to say that it shouldn't be meaningful, and I'm not going to allow people to tell me that I'm saying that. It's not that work isn't meaningful. It's that they require meaningful work, and meaningful work is defined differently. Either they need to feel they're part of a higher purpose, that they're in an organization that appreciates them, that recognizes them. We know this from the data, like tons of data that's out there. We collect that data with our partners at Talent Keepers, but you'll see that data being collected, globally by places like Gallup and McKinsey. We all know it. I don't know how many more data points you need to see, right? That work needs to be meaningful, but that how they define meaningful work is either I feel a part of something that's bigger than me, which means companies need to do a better job at defining, even if they're making widgets, what role do these widgets play in people's lives, et cetera, et cetera. They need to be more thoughtful and intentional about defining what that means. Or the meaningful work is whatever allows me to live my life on my terms. So, and with young folks who are people of color, and particularly African Americans, a lot of what they are doing is entrepreneurship. I'm investing in my education. And for these folks who are under the age of 25, when they can't run for office, at least in the United States, or they can't run for Congress, and they don't feel their votes count, creating companies that provide generational wealth, getting that education, these become inherently political acts. This is where they start to exercise their political power. Somebody who does this really well is somebody like, Shaquille O'Neal. Everybody, there are a lot of people that poo-poo him. He's on every ad. You get tired of seeing him sometimes. But what's really interesting about Shaquille that kind of differentiates him from LeBron, not saying one is better than the other, but Shaquille's just gone out. He's on boards. He's invested in his own advertising agencies. He's taken influential positions in companies because his goal here is to invest in underserved communities, or to at least control companies where they have had egregious incidents that have articulated racist policies. And he's just saying, okay, I got the money and the intelligence and the education, and I'm going to change these things. That's an inherently political act. So I think boomers dismiss these dramatic changes. Boomer leaders dismiss this at their own peril. And don't get me wrong, I am a boomer. I'm a trailing boomer. But I will say that in some ways, and I think this is part of the African American, especially African American female experience, is that our identification with generations is quite fluid. We have to do whatever we can to hustle, especially as a Black woman. I have found how difficult it is for Black women to get the kind of championship they need. I got many coaches, people want to tell me how to act and how to talk. I got plenty of cheerleaders on the sideline hoping I'll win. But finding champions that get in the game and spend that cultural, social, political, and fungible capital, right, to help you make the plays that help you get to the goal line, very difficult to do.
Yeah, and I love your focus on the inclusion and the connection with activism. And your example of Shaquille O'Neal is really interesting. And let's not forget, he's now Dr. Shaquille O'Neal, which I think is fantastic. And we shouldn't forget. And you're a doctor as well. And I think we give people their due for the efforts that they've put into their own learning and growth and development and what they can offer. And he's not just an ex-athlete, right? Yeah. He's not just a sports commentator. He's much, much more than that. Let's not diminish his efforts by, framing him that way, right?
Yeah, got his PhD in it. Actually, I was just talking to my team about this, that he got his PhD in business administration. I am not sure. I want to say Florida International, but I don't think that was it. But he got his PhD very early on after his retirement from basketball, which led me to believe he was probably working on it before he actually retired. But his intentionality in what he's doing is a model that I think, especially young people of color, are really embracing. And you're seeing this, there's that show called The Sweet Life with Issa Rae, I think, where again, young people of color, young African Americans are investing in businesses in Compton, in Los Angeles. We see it here in Chicago, an embrace of the pathways to success that are still offered by education and starting your own business. And I would argue that we don't often highlight these efforts. but these are political acts as much as financial and career acts. And we have to recognize that these are folks that are saying, you can take my voting rights away, but I'm still going to pursue my generational wealth. I'm going to pursue success on terms that are often very much admired in this country. So I think it's really important to also recognize that we need to champion these efforts. We need to get in the game and help them win.
Yeah. So how can leaders, CEO, C-suite, all the way down, how can they better lead and manage their teams and lead out on employee activism and creating an environment where that can happen?
First of all, you have to stop with the arrogance. There's an arrogance, and I'm just going to say it. You know, John, you're going to know I'm straight in a chaser, right? I'm not going to. Many of my own team kind of worries somewhat a bit on my unfiltered. I try to be respectful, but there's just times when I just have to say it. There's an arrogance that needs to be abandoned. And abandon the arrogance that comes with power, but stop abdicating the responsibility that comes with power. And that's what I've been seeing too much of. And when I say that, I also mean too many of these company leaders, the C-suite and the next level of directors, managing directors, they've abdicated the responsibility. And what they've done is they've said, well, we're just going to hire a chief diversity officer. We'll just let our chief talent officers deal with it. They don't give them the resources, nor do they give them the support that they need to chart a new course of learning and development, starting with the C-suite. So what happens, and I talk about this all the time, is we end up with diversity theater. And this diversity theater, sounds like the script is great, but the actors kind of suck. Okay. And what we end up with is a situation where I was just, I get a lot of young people, especially young people of color, mid-level, senior level executives, which everybody says they're all looking for, but we can't find them, right? We can't find them. Well, she had gotten this one latest incident where she had gotten an excellent reference from somebody in the company that she was pursuing in terms of a job. And she got responses back. And you've seen it, John. We've all seen it. Emails that come back talking about how crazy busy they are, not acknowledging that here's this great talent that's just been handed to them as a gift. But instead, their response back to this great talent is how busy they are, and an itinerary of their next 2 weeks as to why it is they can't, engage. Who does that? That's not even a lack of professional training. That's just a lack of home training. That's a lack of treating this incredible talent as the human that she is. What should have been said is, wow, it's so great to meet you. That there should have been a thank you to that person who gave the reference, right? That's a colleague of yours you just disrespected with your crazy busy and your itinerary for the next 2 weeks. But it should have been, wow, thanks a lot for the reference. Hey, it's so great to meet such a great talent. Would love to meet with you. How does the week after next look for a conversation? But what we're not doing is we're not training our managers and our directors, right? So we can talk a good game in the C-suite. We can hire a chief diversity officer, but if the policies and the processes are not backed up by training a different mindset and a different way of acting, and quite frankly, just the home training these people should have known all along, then we have that gap between the script and the actors. And it becomes performative, and it becomes unsustainable. It undermines the sustainability of these DEI efforts, and quite frankly, of the talent management efforts that need to happen in an era of talent scarcity. And again, I will say we should always be in that era. We should always be in that mindset. I don't care whether there are 500 people for each job or a half a person for each job. When you're talking about human capabilities, talent is always scarce because you need to get the right person for the right job in the evolution of your company. And that's critical. And you can't do that if you've got managers who are responding to talent in ways that are just not reflecting of humanity.
Wow, there's so much you said there. That is just awesome. And yes, we can't just go through the performative actions. We have to actually disrupt, the systems, the processes, the policies, practices, and procedures within the organization that are problematic, that allow the inequities to persist, right? That has to happen. And just hiring, having the rhetoric around DEIB and hiring a chief diversity officer, that alone won't do it. And I've seen this so many times. I've seen so many organizations where, I mean, I guess on the one hand, I got to give them credit. At least it's something they're paying some attention to now, and they weren't even paying attention to it at all before. But if you hire a chief diversity officer or put together your diversity committee or whatever, and you don't give them resources, they don't have top-down buy-in from the executives, guess what? They're not going to be able to accomplish much of anything. And the one organization I'm thinking of, they've put a lot of effort. They legitimately have put a lot of money, time, and effort into diversity, equity, and inclusion in their organization over the last decade. But they had a top leadership change maybe 3 or 4 years ago. This new person was not on board the same way as the last CEO, and it's shown, and it's impacted things. And there's a huge diversity crisis and inclusion crisis in this organization, where all of their best diverse talent is leaving. They're all bailing and jumping ship because they don't want to be around all of the constant microaggressions. They don't want to constantly be told that they're in charge of fixing a problem that wasn't theirs in the first place, that that they didn't make. And so that kind of stuff is just so aggravating. So yes, as CEOs, we got to check ourselves. We got to get beyond our own arrogance, have some intellectual humility. We need to truly be behind diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging efforts, and support it, not just in word, but in deed, also with the resources, so that it can be successful. And ultimately that will give us a better chance to create an environment where people truly feel like they belong, that they truly want to be there. We'll be able to attract and retain really great people from all different walks of life, all different types of diversity, including cognitive diversity, all sorts of things that will help the organization be stronger and will help us stand out as an employer of choice within a crowded job labor market, right? Where people have options.
Well, and it also will drive revenue. Talent is your engine of growth. So in the company that you're referring to, the real question, the real proof in the pudding is going to be how long can they sustain, revenue and revenue growth, right? Nobody's going to go out of business here, but the bottom line is there's always going to be a competitor that's going to manage their assets, their human assets, better than you, and that's going to deliver better returns, better growth, better profitability. And here's the thing: CEOs and COOs that do not understand this ignore this at their own peril. So that's the reason why we focus on helping companies implement new processes for managing talent. I cannot emphasize this enough, that it is beyond DEI. It is managing talent better. It is minimizing those operational inefficiencies that foster bias and exclusion, but also undermine the creativity and innovation required to compete effectively in the 21st century. And that means not only just changing the processes and the systems that are inefficient, right? That's what we focus on. We don't talk about white fragility and white supremacy. We talk about operational inefficiencies that are dragging down your business. And then the key is create learning and development so that the actors can execute the script, right? If you don't do both, then you're not going to get the benefits that inclusion management can give you, that will help you drive profitability and revenues from your core engine of growth, which is your human capital. the humans that work there. And we always argue that we start with inclusion first, because diversity first hurts everyone. We talk about start with inclusion in order. Get your culture to reflect the intentions of your leadership. But more importantly, get your culture trained up in the kinds of efficient talent management operations that are needed in order to grow and drive growth and sustain it in the 21st century. And what happens to people of color, to people who are not of the majority culture, they're the canaries in the coal mine. It's not as if, you know, Black people or women or Latinx folks or whoever is asking for something different. They're just asking for the same things that the miners are asking for. It's just that they're more vulnerable when things go awry. They're the canaries. They're the ones that die first, right? But the miners aren't doing so great either. We're not trying to fix the canaries here. We're trying to fix the mine. And the mine must change, and it must evolve because the economy has changed. We have a different economy, and that economy is driven by those uniquely human capabilities. And managers and leaders who are in this boomer generation need to review their business history and realize how much things have transitioned since they were coming of professional age.
Yeah, well said. Lauren, I note the time. I need to let you go here in just a moment. So many great things that have come up in this conversation. We've only scratched the surface, and we could go on and on and on for hours, I think, but we're going to have to end there today. Before we wrap up, though, I just wanted to give you a chance to share with listeners how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us a final word on the topic for today.
Yes, well, definitely check us out at letsdowhatmatters.com. We've just redone our services page. We have a really great what we call our desired future assessment, where we can really measure both engagement kind of horizontally as well as inclusion, and we're able to connect the dots between expectations and actual impact with that assessment, and help people with roadmaps, with strategies on how to use inclusion management successfully. So please visit us at letsdowhatmatters.com, because, you know, we can't get around this. We have to manage humans better for the 21st century. And that starts with treating them with humanity and putting in processes that will help us do that and deliver on the growth expectations as well.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lauren. It's been a pleasure. I encourage listeners to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Lauren can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day.